My name is Ryan Frampton. I am the co-founder and CEO of SalesQ. And because we integrate with tools like Wingman from Clari, Gong, and even Chorus, we get a lot of our customers asking us about which platform they should buy. And it really depends on their needs. They're all really great platforms. So I've got an awesome crew of sales leaders here with us today who use all these different platforms on a day-to-day basis to have them have a discussion around why they chose that platform, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. We can start off with some introduction. Brian, do you want to quickly just introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it. I'm Brian, of course. I'm a senior sales manager at DemandHub, an SMB focused software platform. So my job is building and scaling the sales department, currently leading SDRs, BDRs, and AEs. And right now for revenue intelligence, we're using Wingman.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Over to you, Evan. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Evan Stanton, Vice President of Sales over at CommerceBear. We essentially are an e-commerce enablement platform for specifically furniture manufacturers. We are an early stage company that is essentially has a fairly small but scaling sales team. We have 4 account executives, business development team of 5 right now, and we are using Course as our conversational intelligence tool. And this is actually the 3rd company that I implemented Course at or was part of implementing it at.
Thanks so much, Evan. Josh, why don't we throw it over to you?
My name is Josh Kirkham. I'm a senior sales manager over at Hubspot, specifically Hubspot Canada. So our goal is to help millions of Canadian businesses grow better, obviously through our full CRM suite. In my past life at Vidyard, I not only used Chorus, but was part of the transition from Chorus to Gong. And at HubSpot today, we are heavy Gong users. So I've not been part of the implementation of it, but I am a part of a lot of projects using Gong to help our sales team scale better across Canada.
Myself, I've used Chorus, Gong, Wingman, and all different roles. So I've used them all. But Josh, maybe to stick with you, curious, what made you, because I know you've used also Gong, I believe, at your time at Vidyard. What are some of the things you like about Gong?
I am a huge Gong fan, to be very honest. I find it's a really impressive platform from the data that it has. I've obviously used it with it integrating to Salesforce as well as HubSpot as we use it today. I think the 2 biggest ways that I use Gong is probably not to the fullest extent, which I think is probably one downside of my experience with them. I think they do a lot that I might not fully understand how to maximize. So the main functions that I use it for is call recordings and call coaching, obviously asynchronously after the fact, just making sure that the coaching and the feedback that we are working on across the team is actually being implemented. And if not, I can use examples to showcase what good looks like and where areas for improvement are. The other area that I use Gong the most is probably for insights, understanding things that are being said, how deals are progressing, and using the full timeline aspect within Gong, more from a deal opportunity perspective to pipeline reviews. It's probably the 2 biggest areas that I like to use Gong.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One of the biggest things I use Gong for, Hyper Comply, implemented them there, and the deal board functionality really helped with like pipeline reviews.
I find it incredibly helpful from an accountability perspective. So not only what deals people have, but what are the specific functions that have happened in it? What are the conversations from email, phone calls, actual live meetings? And I find it a lot easier to jumble through them versus just an intro.
Evan, maybe to go back to you, because you're someone that not only has been a user of Chorus, but also a buyer of it multiple times. What makes you keep going back to it?
I think by chance, I just spent the last 6 years building teams. Like I go and establish a team from almost nothing. That's just what I've been focused on over the last number of years. And quite frankly, courses, when I first implemented it at Vidyard, I was part of the buying committee there. The reason that we chose Course over Gong, quite frankly, was price. That's where they won the deal. But now that I'm a Course user, I know how to manage it. I know how to implement it. When I look at my time as I'm building a tech stack, building a team, building call plans, all that good stuff, I just don't feel the need to even have to, and this might sound like I'm not doing my due diligence, but as long as the price meets the budget, like I'm just going to go with Course again, because I'm already up to speed on it. And it's not going to be another software that I have to learn and implement. And then furthermore, you hang on to your relationships over there as well. But it seems to do everything that I need it to do. I think the one thing that I think would be helpful for anybody that's watching is one thing that I found with Course where I am at today. One of the things that's a huge opportunity for CommerceBear is that our ICP is actually fairly vast. Like you got to be a furniture manufacturer who wants to sell your product on Wayfair and Amazon and Overstock and Home Depot and so forth. There is more qualification criteria that makes up a successful customer, but our ICP is pretty vast. So one of the things that I find I'm not utilizing to the highest potential is flagging bad deals. And that's where I've used Course in the past very successfully, is setting up triggers with Course for when a negative comment, not negative, but something that we know, like when a buyer says XYZ, the deal shouldn't come in. Like we should walk away from that. That was really positive to pick up or that was a really, really helpful thing with Course to pick up those those negative talk tracks that actually disqualified a deal where we don't really have a large component that disqualifies a deal at CommerceBear. Again, big opportunity for CommerceBear, but for utilizing Course, the main thing that we're using it for is call reviews, one-on-one call coaching. And then the most valuable thing that I'm sure all of these platforms do is allow you to create a playlist. So whenever I come across a super killer call, I can write a description, and then that becomes part of my onboarding for new reps.
I love that. There's definitely that in Gong as well. You can funnel calls. Brian, can you do that in Wingman as well?
Yeah. So for me, I'm primarily using it for one-on-one call coaching. I would say as a sales leader, I'd spend, just off the top of my head, like 80% of my time would be in Wingman. I just feel it's like the most impactful and most scalable. So beside that, the other thing that I'm using it for is game tapes. So a lot of the times, because I'm leading SDRs, BDRs, AEs, my responsibilities are spread. So if I have a new BDR or if we're trying to optimize with AEs, one of the best ways that we can do that is just by listening to game tapes. And we can actually get pretty specific in the folder there where you have the opportunity to drill down on calls that went well on top of the funnel, specific objections we can categorize, closing cadences, things like that. I'd say within the platform, similar to you guys, I'm probably not using it to the full extent, but I'm super happy with the ability to call coach and create game tapes.
It sounds like the platforms are all very helpful, all have distinct features. There's slight different ways of doing things, but why don't you feel you're getting more out of the tool, being able to actually use all the functionality? Like what was onboarding like?
I think because I never was part of the buying committee, and when we first implemented it, we never really got onboarded. And it's actually interesting, even reflecting back my time at Vidyard, I think the onboarding option was like a group kind of training, and it just never fit into my schedule. When we first implemented Gong, I was still an account executive. I was a little crazy. So if I wasn't selling between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., I wasn't doing anything else. And I did that very purposely as well. And I just feel like nobody ever showed me. So even coming to HubSpot, the only things that I've been using Gong for, the things I originally learned to use it for, which is the deal reviews, like going through the pipeline views, insights, and then call reporting. So I think there's a lot from a revenue intelligence perspective, which is obviously the main selling feature of Gong, that I just have never learned to use and never created the time to further explore. So I do think that's a downside of what I've seen from my experience. And so Evan's smiling a little bit in there too.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I can tell you one. So again, as a builder of teams, it's like first 6, 8 months, year, it's like you're just getting everything established. And then time starts to open up as the revenue engine starts to move, right? The cogs start to roll. So I think it might have been like January, February this year. I took a moment to go, okay, I'm using Course this way, how I use it, which I think we've also uncovered. It's like the way Brian is using it, Josh is using it is all different. We're all leaders of teams, but we have our different nuances of how we're utilizing the tool. And then to your point, Ryan, everyone's saying, I'm not getting its full potential. So as a good steward of capital, as we all are, I got on with Course and actually with CSM, like they're hammering me all the time because they want that renewal. Hey, is there anything we can help with? I'm like, yeah, let's jump onto a call. I said, I just want to understand a little more about analytics because quite frankly, when I go through analytics on the Course platform, like it looks like stuff that should be in a knowledge base article with these beautiful graphs of like how ideally, like this is the amount of talk time you should have. I'm like, this isn't really usable stuff, but I realize how intuitive the platform is. So I'm like, I'm probably just like abandoning the platform or the site and going and doing something else because I'm just like, I don't know how to navigate it. So I jump on with our CSM and I essentially asked them, I'm like, this is how I'm using it. What are your best practices? What can you uncover for me to increase the amount of time that I'm spending in Course? And essentially very upfront, this is going to help at renewal. Let's make this more sticky. They didn't have an answer. And I actually asked them, I'm like, I feel like with these softwares and these tools, competitive as well with Wingman and Gong, there's like a break. There's how the software operates and the tool operates and what its intent is. But then the way that people actually use it and utilize it and use it to train is vastly different. And then when I ask for best practices, they don't have any. And I found that to be really interesting because again, I think that it's one of those tools out there right now where everybody goes, yeah, it's great. We use it. We can quantify and qualify why we have to renew because we're better with it than without it. But like, I'm not getting full potential out of it. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, similar experience. Like when I was onboarding, I got like a few videos, few help articles. And then when I had some feedback, a lot of the times I was working with someone who might not have been in sales, which makes total sense. But when I was asking how to maximize some of the features, I feel like they maybe didn't understand exactly what I was looking for and how I could get the most to ultimately generate the most revenue. So I feel like if they could help us more with a sales leader lens versus like a feature lens, and here's the product and here's what this button does, I feel like we could probably take it to the next level.
Yeah. I find like my experience buying Gong, the sales rep was really good at that. It was like, hey, what is your biggest thing that you need to do at Hypercomply when I started? Because Gong was the first purchase I made like a couple months in, and quantified how much I needed to increase ACV, what that would do, how that would help us hit our annual growth target, and even gave some ideas around exactly what we could track, best practices to do it. But then as soon as she went to the CSM side, we didn't really have that same experience. But I think it's the root cause is because the sales rep understands sales, whereas folks don't necessarily, unfortunately. I don't know if that's fixable, but I did experience the same thing with Gong.
And again, we all know the climate that we're sitting in, but my CSM changed. I got 5 different intros in a quarter of my CSM changing over at Zoominfo in course. So it's as these companies get as large as they do, which is ultimately their goal, there's not a lot of context between the conversations.
Yeah. I think every business, no matter the category, struggles with this, right? How do we train customer success managers to help someone do a job better that they've never done themselves? It's a classic BDR cold call problem where a BDR is cold calling someone to help them do their job better that they've never done. So I empathize with the situation.
It's interesting too, because like our account is very simple with them.
Yeah.
DemandHub as well, but HubSpot with Josh is probably something that they treat a little different.
There's a lot of support we get from the Gong CSMs. It's not for me directly. And part of that's probably because I haven't asked. And that is something as well. I think across HubSpot, we have something like 4,000 salespeople out of the 9,000 employees we have. And the rest of the team is mainly brought up of developers. And obviously with those 4,000 salespeople, there's something like 150 different direct sales managers, not counting the channel side of things, which is obviously a more complicated process to map out. There's something like 20 directors of sales, and there's 10 VPs of sales going through. So obviously the org is a different structure. I do know there's a lot of projects that Gong is going through with us right now to help implement coaching at a different scale, using keyword features that they can see after the fact to help pick up what's being said and what's being missed. Obviously, one of the challenges with that, though, is the accuracy of some of those things that they're doing, but it's part of a greater initiative. They're trying to scale it across HubSpot. So I feel that the CSM team that we have at HubSpot for Gong is phenomenal. They're doing a great job, but obviously there's so many people and so many things to look at. I'm sure it's more so aligning to whatever senior leadership initiatives you can align to, like everyone was saying, to make it easier for the renewal conversations versus the overall adoption, because there's also a part of adoption where it's if you're using the platform, you're watching calls, you're using this, that's one level of adoption, even if you're not using it to the fullest extent.
It's always going to be the system of record, right? Like you have all of your call recordings in there. It's something that's hard to not renew.
I've been involved on the software 682 calls. So a lot of time is spent there. I'd say the one metric that's improving considerably would be, and it's not always a positive linear relationship, of course, but our agreement sign rate and our close ratios essentially are improving. And that's because we're spending so much time optimizing our demo period, and we switch sub verticals. It required a brand new go-to-market scorecard. And then we had to make so many iterations to make sure that it's working. Now to the point where I was living on it so much and grading it so much that I just skip over that now. And like you and I have been talking about what you've been working on at SalesQ is it doesn't have the ability to tell me something. I'm doing all the work. So I'm going in, I'm scoring this, that, and the other. I have to figure out where in the call I want to focus on for each rep, because each rep has different opportunities. So that was like the big sort of feedback that I was giving you and that you've been able to run with, was the difference of I go into Wingman and I figure out the problem and then I can move from there, versus with SalesQ, with the automations, it can point me in the right direction, which allow to be just like way more efficient and then spend more time doing more valuable coaching.
The biggest thing that I know I did when I came to HubSpot is I think I averaged the most Gong calls watched in HubSpot over that past year in my first month. Because I needed to understand HubSpot, how we sold, what the gaps were, what are things we do well, not only within my team, but other teams, other regions as well. So I was not always the greatest husband because I was taking way too much time after work, watching too many Gong calls, but it helped get me up to speed and understanding where the gaps were in my team as fast as I could. We actually saw 30% increase in our win rate within the first 3 months of me being able to start standardizing that stuff. And we almost doubled our average deal size. And that wasn't because it was impressive, it's because it was that bad at the start. But the challenge has still been how to continue to scale out, standardizing the process without watching hours and hours and hours of Gong calls. Because I found that as my team grew, I had 6 reps that were directly reporting to me at the start. It was possible to carve out 2 to 3 hours a week to watch Gong calls and watch a call per rep. But right now I'm at 8 team members that I'm managing. Plus some of them are very junior. So I'm joining more sales calls than I'm actually watching calls. And so time management perspective has been incredibly challenging because I'm finding that I either have to watch calls and report on calls towards the late part of the night or on the weekends. And the other challenge is I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of reps' time off. If they're getting notifications of me commenting on their Gong calls on Saturday morning, what's the likelihood that they're actually going to see what I commented on versus actually taking their weekend in charge? And that's been one of the challenges that I've been facing. And actually, we're waiting to comment on it until Monday morning so that they don't get the notification until later. So that I'm not
the delay feature.
Yeah, a delay feature would be sick. But those are the things that I've loved about it, but also the challenges that I faced, especially as we're building out a new segment.
Is anyone else's partner like weirded out by how fast I listen to calls? And what do you even listen to?
That's a good one. So one of the things, like, and again, this, people are going to watch this thing. So maybe there's certain things that we don't want to admit to, but I'll just get the ball rolling. It's like the call coaching piece and watching call recordings is the first thing to get deprioritized. It's the very first thing to get deprioritized. And what's interesting, into our world, we're very much driven on a trade show schedule. Once a quarter, we're physically at a trade show, and that's where we'll build $1 million in pipeline across $20,000 AOV. So like, that's where we make our quarter over 3 days at a trade show. And then all of a sudden we come back and our sales cycles is about 45 days. So then for the next 2 months, we're just like, cancel all meetings. It's demo time. It's close time. And then we just rinse and repeat that. So what's interesting is even over the last 4 weeks, because we just came off a trade show at the end of April, over the last 4 weeks, deprioritize call coaching. I don't have time. I don't want the AEs distracted with it. And last but not least, as much as coaching is important, I want to prioritize my reps' confidence over them getting in their head and being reflective. Like, I don't need anybody being reflective in the fourth quarter of the game. We're down 10 points and I don't need anybody second guessing themselves. So I almost I strategically remove it. But it's interesting because it's almost like this is the time that we should prioritize it. But again, from a time perspective, and then my philosophy, I deprioritize it. So, and I think it all just comes into the whole sense that it's a reactive method of training. It's a reactive method of selling. That's one of the things of why it's easy for me to deprioritize, quite honestly, because I hate reactive work. I was like, hey, you totally blew a $60,000 deal. Let's watch the call. It's hard to do. And that's why, again, Brian, you're sitting there on 3x speed listening to the Chipmunks album.
Evan, you came from a sports background as well. And I remember in my collegiate days playing volleyball, coming together as a team where our coach would put on the game that we just finished playing. And you knew you sucked. And I was like, I missed my blocking assignment a couple times. And I know he's going to call it out in front of, in this case, my entire team. But it's also that awkwardness factor behind it too, where it's a point that actually stops people from utilizing the tool to its fullest because they don't like how they sound, they look, and it takes the focus away from improving and getting better. And it adds other barriers as well to how they're trying to implement the tool. And even going to what you were saying, Evan, around the confidence and like the charisma and things like that, I think it's also something that's been a challenge, not only being reactive, but also stopping reps from looking to see where they can go to improve because of other like self-confidence or self-limiting barriers that I've seen across teams.
The sports background piece is an interesting connection analogy, because really what the coach is trying to do is create accountability amongst the team to say in front of the whole team, Josh, you missed that block. So go get better. And remember, you're accountable to the whole team. And that's really big in sports. But again, you look at the amount of games played, like you look at what our reps right now are demoing, and I'm like, or like the demos and the calls that they're going through, sometimes 5 a day, depending on your model. So it's,
You're going to miss stuff inevitably.
they're going to miss stuff. They're human beings. And then they have an off call. And then the one call goes really bad. And then the worst part is then they jump on that call that they should be closing, key decision call, deals at the end, at the final stages. And then they're just like in the wrong headspace. And I also think too, right now, it's so interesting because these tools are crucial. Every single sales team in the world needs something like this, no matter what they're selling, if they're remote, because we're not there sitting on the floor listening to each other anymore. Hey, what did you say there, Josh? That sounded like a really great objection handling to ABC, XYZ. We don't have that anymore. So I'm more so using courses like an onboarding tool. Like I'm using it for my reps to be able to watch each other's stuff and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting how you handled that. But again, I just can't get over how reactive it is for us to all go. And you think about the time spent too. The time spent, Brian, for you watching those calls and not coming at your strategy. I think it's great. I should be watching more calls. But the amount of time that we spend strategizing on deals that we can't win back, that's where I think it just differentiates a little bit from that sports analogy. And again, like, what is a proactive way that we can keep reps moving, have them not on calls with us looking at their calls, but on a call with the potential customer and handling it correctly?
The way I like to look at Gong, like Evan was saying, it was from a reactive standpoint. What are the trends that you've done historically that we need to fix moving forward?
Right.
Right. So I look at Gong, how I look at data. How have you been looking at it historically? And then how can we pinpoint one, maybe two things that we can change and implement to help make sure that you don't fall into the same downfalls that you had in the past? One of the biggest examples I had coming into HubSpot was that the team was very weak at end of call execution. So asking about pulling at risk and booking a next step. And what we found is that extended our sales cycles. We didn't have the same velocity in our deals. And in small business HubSpot, we're 80% in month create to close. So there's a ton of pressure to make sure that you're running an efficient model and scheduling next steps and not chasing people, because you need to find a lot of pipeline at the same time. So the way that I've looked at it was seeing historically similar to data, where are gaps and pitfalls that we've had across the team. And the thing I really like about SalesQ today is that team members can get a very easy, actionable thing of what we need. So I know for us specifically, the biggest gap that we had was end of call execution, stakeholders, timelines, concerns, buying process, and then actually asking for and booking that next step. And I think there was a big difference between reps were asking for next steps, but they weren't doing it with conviction, and they weren't making it about the buyer. They were just saying, hey, Evan, we should book a next step. And Evan's like, how does that benefit me to book a next step with you? I've already seen the demo. And that was a big gap that we had. So finding ways that we can ask for a next step that made it to the benefit of the buyer to help actually control our sales cycle. And that's been a really big way that we've been using SalesQ. And the members of the team that are using the tool religiously, I'm seeing a huge increase in their win rates. And there's obviously still some adoption things that we're struggling with, just building the routine and the habit with it. But out of the 8 reps that I have, 4 are using it very consistently over the last 3 weeks. And I'm seeing, doing calendar inspections, more discovery calls have demos booked on the calendar and not chasing. More demos have feedback or stakeholder or business case calls on the calendar as well. And so we're seeing it's helping us run a more efficient process. And I think that's a really big way that we've been using it to complement implementing sales processes versus seeing where the gaps are in sales processes.
At any given time, like 1 or 2 things that the team's working on. And the advantage with SalesQ, as I have it up here, is so the number one thing that's an op, over time, I just slowly see creep down the page, right? Because they're starting to implement it more because we're talking about it, we're looking at it, we're optimizing it. So I would say the best part about SalesQ in complement to Wingman is that it actually like makes it easier for them to implement, because one of the one of the opportunities with Wingman, what we had something called battle cards where it'd prompt them to actually say stuff. So we talked about reactivity versus proactivity. There were certain like keywords that would prompt the battle card in Wingman. And the guys found it was actually really distracting. So it'd pop up on their screen, or it wasn't actually, they were like false positives. So it'd pop up and they didn't want it. Whereas with SalesQ, they just have the meat and potatoes of what they need to say, reminding them there. And like I've iterated it so that it's really focused on the things that we're trying to optimize. So I think that's like the best way that the team gets the best use out of it, is actually just seeing it there so that they can be proactive and they can actually make that impact on the call versus, again, going back, having a conversation, getting the feedback, and then it's already 2 weeks down the line.
I know SalesQ's hosting this conversation, but it's almost not even in the same category as Gong course. It's proactive, it's scorecarding. My sales processes are they're fluid, but there is a rigidity to them. And the beginning and the end of the call is always scripted to keep that call off and set up a proper upfront contract that we've proven out time and time again to be successful. But I think, to echo Brian's comment, it's actually something that the rep enjoys using. And I think that's huge, because you look at what AEs are doing. I think all of us have been in that world, right? And now you got Slack. Now you're getting pinged in the middle of a demo as well with somebody who needs to talk to you about something else that's off topic. And you're getting Slack, you're getting lit up with that. You're always getting told that your notes aren't good enough in Salesforce or HubSpot. You're trying to remember the 90 different things that their sales leaders say, this is how the process works. And why didn't you ask for next steps there? Why didn't you pull out risk? And there's a million things going through their heads. So what I really like about this is it's very much in line with my sales process. And that's why, Ryan, as soon as we were introduced to it, we implemented it, because it's just a checklist that they go through, and it's got everything that we require and know that we need to pull out of our deals. And I also love the fact that the intelligence gets better with every call. So it's picking up those talk tracks and then adapting itself. So it's proactive. Ask ourselves this question. It can be difficult for a sales leader, except for Brian, because he's really good at it. But it'd be difficult for a sales leader to log into Course or log into Gong. Again, as I mentioned, I deprioritize it, and I know others do. But imagine an AE. And they're the ones that, Josh, you were talking about it when you were an account executive, individual contributor. It's like, you're like, if it's not building pipeline or closing deals, I ain't doing it. And we also know too, that there's a certain type of rep that is more rare than not, that really wants to invest in their own development. A lot of reps are just burn and churn, baby. And that's okay. They could drive a lot of revenue, but like, how many of them on their own logged into Course, Gong, or Wingman today? That's the question. But I can tell you right now, of all the demos and decision calls that we had today, I've got one rep who has not adopted, quite frankly, but my other 3 reps, they use it on every single call. We got to guide the reps during the game to make the right moves, not just watch game tape. And that's why, again, to your sports analogy, Josh, there's usually a coach sitting on the sideline during the game too. What software was it that allowed you to whisper to people? Sales Log. Do you remember that? I sure do. Oh yeah. Let's just derail the poor BDR who's just trying to get started, book a couple of opportunities, and we're going to go ask him to take the meeting.
I was going to tell a very similar story when I first started at Vidyard, and I had never cold called before. And I didn't know my manager was listening to me, and they started whispering to me in the thing. And I was like, what is happening? It threw me off. I was not a fan of that tool.
That was one of the strangest things. I remember that. That's wild.
Maybe to end off the session, guys, if you could just give maybe one word of advice to someone that is going to purchase the tool that you use, which is Chorus, Gong, or Wingman, what would you say is the biggest advice for someone that's looking to buy that solution and implementing it?
Definitely do it. The major help, call listening and revenue intelligence is like the meat and potatoes of driving revenue as a sales leader. So with Wingman, I love it. It's super user friendly. They're open to my feedback, and being at a smaller scale startup, it was really competitive for costs as well.
Gong's phenomenal. They're obviously an industry leader for a reason. They're investing a lot in the product. They do a lot of really cool things. I think the biggest thing to think about is literally what Evan said. The purpose of the tools is to see gaps in the process to coach forward, but we have to be proactive. I think the trap that too many people fall into is they're too reactive about how they think about it, or they don't find ways to create accountability to have the team use it through onboarding or where they want them to use it so they can actually get better. And I think that's a huge power that the tool has, but I feel like it's not always thought through how people are going to execute and using it, which is where it becomes reactive. So I 100% agree with what everyone was saying, that the point needs to be use it to find gaps and find a way to be proactive with how you're thinking. Gong's off.
Yeah, mine would be you absolutely need it if you're especially distributed. Like you absolutely need it in this day and age. I think it's also huge if there's somebody out there that doesn't have it, you're on the edge. From a compliance perspective, it's amazing. And when a deal sometimes goes bad, quite frankly, we had a deal that was negotiated and then when closed, lost. And then they popped back up 3 months later, negotiated again. And then they almost walked away from the deal because they thought that we had raised the price on them and essentially tried to do something unjust. I was morally hurt. I was like, I would never do that. I like, it's morals and ethics and us helping your business before anything. We would never jack up a price on you, just try to get you. I actually ended up sending the call recording to the prospect to say, hey, listen, if you don't move forward with the business, that's totally okay. But I just want to clear my name, my rep's name, and my company's name because we didn't do anything here to try to pull the wool over your eyes. And I actually had the customer sign on and even come to it. We worked it out and had a big hug at the end of it. From a compliance perspective, you need it. You have to have it. I think the only piece of advice that I would give a sales leader is this will not be a magic bullet for you. And it's also going to affect the long game, not your interim, like not your next quarter. It's like, this is going to affect the long game. You talk about Josh, how many calls you watched at HubSpot when you first joined in order to get a lay of the land. It's so necessary for that. But I don't think a sales leader can look at this thing as being able to help them save next quarter.
Appreciate all of the time that you guys spend today just helping people get up to speed around what's different about these solutions, how you're using it today. Hopefully this was helpful for everybody watching, and stay tuned for the next episode when we have another panel discussion. Soon.